Up next, we are going to be hearing from Rainbow Silk. And this is, sorry, Erica, I'm stealing your thunder. This is for you.
It's okay. We're sharing with Thunderclap. Great. Cool. So yes, we are having Rainbow Silk. We have Claudia Fluegge of Rainbow Silk, who is a local silk painter who has long been a part of our EarthFest celebrations, and her work is heavily inspired by the beauty of nature, and she employs natural processes and materials in her work, like salt crystals and the dry wind of New Mexico.
And we are going to start off with a video showing some of that silk painting process here. So I'm going to share my screen.
Hi everyone, my name is Claudia and I'm a silk painter. I'm in my backyard and I have a white piece of silk stretched that I'm going to show you how to paint. So this is going to be a scarf. Here you can see the first part of it, and you can see how the salt draws the dye. So I have to paint rather fast because I'm outside and it dries very quickly. So here's the first part. I'm going to remove some of the salt because the center is dry. So now I'm starting to blend the flowers. When you paint outside, you never really know what you're going to get. You can see here, I use some water and I just make the dyes blend together. And then the wind will help me and dry it very quickly. So this is a little bit darker of a red. Then I will use water again to blend it. Some more leaves. All right, I'm going to continue with some blue. And it spreads really easily. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw some salt on there. And you're going to see in a minute what it does. All right, here we go. And it's still acting here on the silk. So while the silk dries, you can see this interesting kind of pattern that the salt starts to make. All right, I'm coming to an end right here. I'm blending turquoise and blue together. Probably all looks like one color actually right now. There's my turquoise. Now we're going to throw a bit more salt on it. Have to do it before it dries. It only works when it's wet. And now it's all done. All silk that has been painted needs to be steamed for the colors to be permanent. And so I got a collection of pieces right here. And now I will roll them up in this big roll of paper that you can see over here. It's like double-sided, one on the top, one on the bottom. And that roll of paper will then go into the steamer. Now that I have all the scarves rolled up in this paper roll, it's sitting on the steamer, and I'm going to be pouring some hot water into it. It has some hot plates, and it will be steamed for, I'd say, about 3 hours. You can hear the steamer working, and so now I'm going to be taking it out. Okay, so the silk has finished steaming, and now I'm washing it in a sink of soapy water. The water is lukewarm, and it will just take out the excess dye. Then after it's washed, usually I use 2 hands, but right now I'm holding the phone with the other. So then you rinse it in some clear water, and then I hang it up outside. Okay, here we are back in my backyard. The wind's doing a pretty good job of drying the silk, and then the project is done. So you can see them flattering in the wind. And I might as well show you some of my garden projects here. So this is my greenhouse, and there's a few little starts that you can see. There's some tomato plants and some basil and peppers. There's also some eggplant and a few flowers, and they grew from seed. It gets a little bit hot in here. It's right now, it's actually 90, so it's a little more than I'd like it to be. We have a solar fan here. But it's not very strong, so sometimes I have to plug this one in to do the work. And you can see sometimes we hook the fan up to the solar panels, and we can change the degrees in the greenhouse by just a few, either to cool it or heat it. I'm going to show you what else I have growing here. There's some peas that have come up. I planted them in late February, and we got our little hoop house here with lots of veggies, lots of greens that I eat every day. So there is some cilantro, some beets, lettuce, lots of Swiss chard. And one more thing I can show you, those are garlics that I planted in the fall. Now these are all growing in buckets. The reason for that is because we have a big mulberry tree here, and it gets to be kind of difficult because the roots will wind around the vegetables. So that's about all I have to show you, and we're coming to an end from this project. The scarves are going to be delivered to Weems Gallery. Weems has moved to Wyoming in Academy. They're just moving this weekend. And you'll be able to see him there. Thank you for watching me silk paint, and have a wonderful Earth Day.
All right. And I do believe that we have Claudia here. Claudia, are you able to unmute and turn on your video and maybe answer some questions from folks? We have about, I believe, 10 minutes. Yep, we have 10 minutes to get through some questions. So if anybody has questions, please ask in chat, use the Q&A tool, or use the raise hand function, and we can enable your microphone. And I actually have a question of my own to get started. So I'm really, well, I guess I'll tell you, Claudia, I'm coming from more of a pottery perspective. That's what I do. And, in pottery, it's really easy to just take like a plant leaf and imprint it on the clay. I'm curious, with the whole world of silk painting, are there ways to use, natural plant materials like that in the silk painting process?
Yes, I do know of an artist in New Mexico who does do that. And I find that very inspiring. I've just not experimented with it myself, but you can definitely have some amazing results with that.
So you do mostly the kind of freehand style, right?
The way I was painting outside, when I was demonstrating, yes, that was freehand. I do have examples of other types of techniques of painting. For example, hold this up. There's a, let's see, you can see it. There's a dolphin. So this has some outlining. It has a metallic outlining. Then this is soy wax. And then this is another type of resist. So there's lots of different ones in this piece, for example. And I can just hold up another work of mine. Whoop. See, I got to lean back so you can see it. It's called Climate in Our Hands. And so that's way more sophisticated, the technique. So that wasn't done all freehand. I had to sketch it out first and use various forms of resist to get the result.
There was a question in chat here. Was that salt that you were putting on the silk in the video?
Okay. Whoops, I missed it. Did you read it?
Yeah, the question was, was that salt that you were putting on the silk in the video?
The salt, what I'm putting on the silk? What kind of salt it is?
They were just asking if it was salt, but I'd be curious. Yeah, it looked like you had two different sizes of salt in your little tool table. Okay.
Yes, that's true. You can use any kind of salt. It will react. When the particles are bigger, I think basically it's a mechanical kind of action, because when you put salt in water, it's going to draw the salt in. And when the silk dries, it releases the water again. And so what happens, then it leaves this residue in the drying process. And so the bigger the particle of salt, the bigger of a reaction you're going to get. You can also use just table salt, and that will work too.
Okay, there was a follow-up from that person asking why, but I think it's for that kind of visual texture that it creates, right?
Yeah, the why is a complicated thing. I once had my daughter so long ago. She did a science experiment when she was little with that, and we tried all different kinds of things. And then we asked some chemists to explain the reaction, and we got very complicated explanations. At the end, I think we decided that it was a mechanical thing that happens, just because if you put something on there that will draw up the moisture, and then while everything around it has already dried except the spot where the salt is, and then it releases the moisture. So that's what we decided.
Okay. We had another question, actually two questions that I think are related. One is, where do you get your silk canvases and materials? And then the other one was for the steaming, what kind of paper do you use for that double roll steaming?
Yeah, so I buy most of my materials from two online companies. One is Dharma Trading. They're located in California, and they have all kinds of fiber art supplies. I don't know what I would do without them. The other company is Thai Silks. They get most of their silk from China, and they also called exotic silk. So that's if you buy a huge, large amount of silk, then you would go with that name. Yeah, those are mainly the two. And your other question was regarding the paper, the steamer. Yeah, I do use a lot of paper. I try to reuse it. So I use it sometimes for wrapping paper. I use it for covering my table. So it's never used singly. I have stacks of it in my garage. It's a kind of newsprint that comes from a company that does newspapers. I've not gotten any there in years, so I hope that they still exist. But the roll that you saw on the floor, somebody actually gave that to me who had stopped doing that kind of artwork. So somehow paper ends up in my house, and I have a lot of it, and I try to reuse it in various ways.
If somebody was just starting out fresh, do you think just some standard brown craft paper could work, or is that thinner newsprint important?
You want to have a thin paper.
Okay.
You want to have a paper that absorbs it. And now there might be a more environmental way to do it, except that I have not done that yet. I know of a silk painter, she uses sheets. Instead of rolling it up in the paper, you could roll it up in just thin sheets. Again, you want to put one layer on the bottom, one on the top, so that the excess dye, or like sometimes you use wax, that all that gets sucked up in there and wouldn't glue back onto the image that you painted. So yeah, you could potentially use cotton. I've just not tried that.
Okay, we have just about maybe a minute and a half here still. I haven't seen other questions, but I can dip into another one of mine. Here again, coming from a pottery perspective, I've had studios out on the East Coast and here, and it's a very different experience. Where on the East Coast, a lot of effort goes into how do I get this stuff to dry more quickly? And here in New Mexico, it's much more, how do I close this stuff off and keep it wet so that it doesn't dry out too quickly? Have you done silk painting elsewhere? And are there differences in climate, similar to that for silk painting?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Now, I've always wondered what it would be like if I was in Hawaii and I would paint, because it's exactly like you're saying, there's so much humidity in the air. I think I could paint a lot slower because, one thing that happens, it creates its own design. If you start at one end of the scarf, for example, and then that gets dry and you touch the part that's dry again, and you get a line. So I was using that technique outside. I wanted that technique because then I didn't need to use any other resist. The wind was basically working with me. And if I did this in Hawaii, my results would be slightly different. So I would probably paint a little bit slower.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Just one last quick question here before we have to get to our next little step. Somebody's asking if you can get the paper from Dharma Trading Company as well, or if they're just the dyes and materials.
The paper, I'm not sure.
Okay.
There's a slight chance that you could. It's like I'm saying, I just, people know what I do, and it just kind of appears in my house. So get creative in terms of what you think you can use. It needs to be something that can handle the steam and doesn't bleed back into the silk, basically. And the steaming process you saw that I had this little box. Now you could do that potentially in a pot, but I've not experimented with that, but you could.
Okay. Well, neat. That's really interesting. Yet another little art form that I find myself wanting to try, but can't take on too much. Thank you so much for sharing that, Claudia. That was really interesting to see the process and to get some questions answered as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.